February 5th, 2016, Dhaka, Bangladesh. The lights are dim inside the Bangladesh bank. Only the hum of a lone printer breaks the silence. At first, the guard thinks it's a malfunction, but page after page rolls out, stamped with the words, "Payment instruction received." By dawn, $951 million in transfer requests have left the bank's SWIFT terminal, all directed to accounts in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia. The nation's reserves, gone with a few lines of code. Half a world away in New York, a Federal Reserve clerk stares at the requests. The signatures are valid. The system says approved. Yet something feels wrong. The names are strange. The timing, impossible. Hours later, before anyone can react, $81 million disappears into the global banking maze. It's not a glitch. It's not an accident. It's a heist, one of the biggest in history. And behind it is not a criminal syndicate, but a nation. The nation of North Korea. How did a small, isolated country manage to breach the world's most secure financial network and almost steal $1 billion? Long before the Bangladesh bank printer began to spit out fraudulent payment orders, the story began in the cold, dimly lit corridors of Pyongyang, one of the most secretive cities on Earth. It was the early 2000s, and North Korea's isolation had become near total. Sanctions tightened like a noose. Crops failed. Factories stood silent. The world was shutting its doors, and the regime was desperate for hard currency. But Kim Jong-il, and later his son Kim Jong-un, saw a way out. Not through diplomacy, not through trade, through cyber power. Around 2005, North Korea quietly began recruiting its brightest young students from elite schools in Pyongyang. Children who showed extraordinary talent in math, physics, or computer science were pulled from classrooms and sent abroad, to universities and covert training centers in China and Russia. There, under foreign instructors, they learned the language of the modern battlefield, malware, encryption, and network exploitation. They weren't training soldiers. They were training weapons with keyboards. When they returned home, they became part of an elite cyber division under the Reconnaissance General Bureau, North Korea's top intelligence agency. Their official name, Unit 121. Their unofficial one, Lazarus Group. While the world imagined North Korea as backward, a nation of blackouts and propaganda, it had quietly built one of the most aggressive cyber war programs on the planet. Lazarus's early missions were crude but effective. In 2009, a flood of attacks knocked out dozens of South Korean government websites. In 2011, they paralyzed major broadcasters. And in 2013, they hit banks across Seoul, wiping hard drives clean and freezing ATMs for days. But these weren't just attacks. They were experiments. Each one taught them something. How to breach networks, how to erase their footprints, how to weaponize trust. Behind every strike was the same invisible signature, meticulous timing, custom malware, and a haunting silence after the damage was done. And then in 2014, Lazarus took its biggest leap. That November, executives at Sony Pictures Entertainment watched their computers go dark one by one. A skull appeared on screens. A message followed. "We've obtained all your data." Within hours, terabytes of private files, unreleased films, salary lists, emails were dumped online. It was revenge. Sony had produced The Interview, a comedy about assassinating Kim Jong-un. The US government blamed North Korea directly. It was the first time a nation-state was formally accused of cyber terrorism against a private corporation. The message to Pyongyang was clear: you've crossed the line. But the message inside Pyongyang was different. It worked. In the aftermath, Lazarus evolved. Disruption was no longer enough. They needed money.
North Korea's nuclear program was expensive. Sanctions had crippled trade.
The regime turned to its hackers not just as soldiers, but as breadwinners. They began targeting financial institutions in Vietnam, in Ecuador, in Poland. They studied how the global banking system worked, especially SWIFT, the international network that moves money between 11,000 banks worldwide. SWIFT wasn't a single system. It was a trusted language between banks, one that confirmed every transaction through digital keys and shared authentication. If you had access, you could move billions without anyone questioning it. And that trust was Lazarus' way in. By 2015, Lazarus had already probed several Asian banks, but one stood out. Bangladesh Bank, the central bank of a developing nation that handled billions in international reserves through the U.S. Federal Reserve. It was connected to SWIFT. It had limited cybersecurity. And more importantly, its system was vulnerable. In January 2015, Lazarus infiltrated the network quietly. No alarms, no explosions, just a silent footprint. For months, they lingered, studying how messages were sent, how approvals were logged, and how the printer in the secure room confirmed each transfer. It was methodical, clinical, patient. By the time the attack began in February 2016, the hackers knew the system better than the bank itself. They weren't just robbing a vault. They were rewriting reality inside the financial bloodstream of a nation. And when the printer came alive that night in Dhaka, it wasn't just printing lies. It was printing history. It began with a mouse click. Somewhere between late January and early February 2016, a single malicious file entered the Bangladesh Bank's network. A Trojan horse disguised as an innocent document. No one noticed. Not when it was opened. Not when it quietly installed itself in the background. And not when it began mapping the network. Every terminal, every credential, every pattern of login. For weeks, it simply watched. This was no smash and grab. This was a slow, deliberate orchestration. The Lazarus Group operated from different time zones, splitting their operations across North Korea, China, and possibly India and Malaysia. Their malware sat inside the Bangladesh Bank's SWIFT environment, a walled-off system connected to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Every night, as employees went home, the hackers worked. They learned which operators handled SWIFT transfers, how daily logs were printed, and what times the bank's internal systems were offline. They monitored everything, even the printer responsible for printing confirmation slips of transfers. To anyone at the bank, life went on as usual. But beneath the surface, reality was being rewritten. At 8:36 p.m. on February 4, 2016, Bangladesh time, still daytime in New York, the Lazarus Group made their move. Using stolen credentials, they accessed the SWIFT terminal and began issuing transfer orders. 35 of them. Each message bore the proper authentication keys. Each one looked legitimate. On paper, it was indistinguishable from a real request. The destination? Accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka linked to fake organizations. The total amount requesting? Just shy of $1 billion USD. The system accepted them. No red flags, no alerts. Money began moving, quietly, invisibly, across borders. In Dhaka, something strange happened that night. The printer inside the SWIFT control room, the one that automatically printed transaction logs, stopped working. A paper jam, the staff thought. Or maybe a small technical fault. It was neither. The Lazarus Group had deliberately sabotaged the printer's driver software. Without it, no one could see what transactions were being processed. The perfect smokescreen. By the time bank officials discovered the issue the next morning and restarted the system, it was too late.
The SWIFT terminal's history showed 35 transfer orders totaling nearly $1 billion.
In New York, staff at the Federal Reserve noticed something odd. One of the requests referenced a Filipino NGO called the Shalika Foundation, but the word foundation was misspelled as foundation. That typo, that one tiny human error, stopped the transfer. The Fed's automated system flagged it for manual review, halting the billion-dollar drain just in time. Without it, the full $951 million might have vanished. But by then, 5 transactions had already gone through, totaling $81 million. Those funds flowed first to the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation in Manila. Then, over the next few days, they moved through shell accounts, converted into pesos, and laundered through the murky world of Philippine casinos, slot machines, junket rooms, high-stakes tables. In less than 72 hours, the money transformed into untraceable chips, then back into cash, and finally wired offshore again. By the time investigators pieced together the path, the funds had dissolved into the bloodstream of the global underworld. $81 million, gone forever. Inside the Bangladesh bank, panic erupted. Officials scrambled to contact New York, SWIFT, and the Philippines. At first, no one believed them. The system logs showed valid authentication. The requests had the right keys. If you couldn't trust SWIFT, what could you trust? News broke days later. The world's financial community was stunned. This wasn't a breach of one bank. It was a breach of the global system that kept the world's money flowing. Lazarus hadn't just stolen millions. They had exposed the soft underbelly of global finance, a blind trust in digital signatures, in protocols written decades ago. Forensic teams from the Federal Reserve, SWIFT, and cybersecurity firms like FireEye and Symantec descended on the Bangladesh bank. They traced the malware's fingerprints, custom code written in a peculiar style, similar to what had been used in the Sony hack 2 years earlier. The patterns matched. The coding syntax was the same. Even the encryption method bore Lazarus's signature. It was conclusive. North Korea had tried to rob a nation. But this wasn't just about the money. For the regime in Pyongyang, this was proof of power, that with a few lines of code, they could shake the very foundations of the world economy. And for everyone else, it was a terrifying realization. The next war wouldn't begin with bombs. It would begin with a password. The heist was over, but the real chaos had just begun. In Dhaka, investigators crowded into the Bangladesh bank's control room, a place that now felt more like a crime scene than a command center. Stacks of paper filled the desks, all showing transfer orders no one remembered authorizing. And the printer, the one that had stayed silent the night before, now roared back to life, spitting out dozens of pages. Each page a receipt for what had already vanished. $81 million, gone. But where? The Bangladesh bank called the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in panic. But the Fed couldn't reverse the transactions. The money had already moved through approved, authenticated SWIFT channels. Across time zones, bankers and investigators raced against the clock. They called officials in Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and Malaysia, pleading for an immediate freeze of any suspicious funds. In Colombo, one transfer of $20 million to a small NGO had already been stopped, the now famous foundation typo that saved hundreds of millions. But in the Philippines, the story was different. There, the money had already hit accounts under fake names. Michael Cruz, Jesse Lagrasas, Alfred Santos, Enrico Vasquez. Within hours, the funds were withdrawn, converted into pesos, and funneled through the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, RCBC, branch on Jupiter Street in Makati City.
From there, they entered the gambling world, casinos, junket operators, and VIP rooms, places exempt from anti-money laundering laws at the time. Money disappeared into flashing lights and roulette wheels. By the time investigators tracked it, they weren't tracing funds anymore. They were chasing smoke. When the story broke in March 2016, it hit the financial world like an earthquake. How could this happen? Was the question echoing through every boardroom and security conference. The SWIFT network, trusted by 11,000 financial institutions across more than 200 countries, had been manipulated. Not hacked directly, but tricked. It wasn't the system itself that was breached, it was the human and technical perimeter around it. And that made it even scarier. If a small group of hackers from a sanctioned nation could exploit a central bank's weak defenses and nearly steal $1 billion from the global financial bloodstream, what stopped them from doing it again? Forensic analysis began to reveal the fingerprints of a familiar ghost. The malware used in the Bangladesh bank heist, codenamed Odinef and Trojan, Banswift, shared deep similarities with the tools used in the Sony Pictures attack 2 years earlier. The coding structure, the encryption libraries, the command and control servers. Even the timestamps matched activity from North Korea's time zone. Cybersecurity firms FireEye, Kaspersky, and Symantec independently confirmed it. The heist had all the hallmarks of Lazarus Group, North Korea's state-backed hacking operation. But attribution in cyberspace is a slippery thing. You can trace IPs, match code, find behavioral overlaps, but proving intentional state involvement is another matter. North Korea denied everything, but quietly, the U.S. Treasury began building a case. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed charges against Park Jin-hyuk, a North Korean programmer believed to be part of Lazarus. He was accused of helping orchestrate the Bangladesh bank heist, the Sony hack, and the WannaCry ransomware attack that crippled hospitals and corporations worldwide in 2017. Park never saw the inside of a courtroom. He was safe in Pyongyang. But the indictment was symbolic, a public declaration that the world knew, and that it wouldn't forget. For Bangladesh, the scars ran deep. The central bank's governor resigned. Senior officials were dismissed. Investigations dragged on for years, clawing back only small fragments of the lost funds. But the damage wasn't just financial. It was psychological. A country's trust in its own institutions had been shattered. Ordinary citizens, reading headlines about a billion-dollar theft, asked how their nation could be robbed, not by men with guns, but by unseen fingers typing from another continent. For many, it was the first time they realized war no longer required soldiers. The SWIFT organization scrambled to repair the breach in trust. They issued urgent new security guidelines, rolled out customer security programs, and pressured member banks to upgrade their firewalls and authentication systems. But in private, executives admitted something chilling. No system could be truly safe when the weakest link was still human. The Lazarus Group had exploited not flaws in SWIFT's code, but flaws in routine, discipline, and trust. And as one investigator later put it, they didn't just hack a bank, they hacked belief. After the Bangladesh heist, similar attacks began surfacing in Vietnam, Ecuador, and Poland, all following the same pattern: malware in the SWIFT environment, forged messages, stolen funds. Each time, the digital fingerprints pointed back to the same invisible hand. Each time, the world was a little slower to react. By 2020, cybersecurity experts estimated that Lazarus had stolen over $2 billion across various financial and cryptocurrency attacks, all to help fund North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. The heist in Dhaka was no isolated crime. It was a template. a proof of concept for digital warfare that could cripple nations without firing a single bullet. And in a way, it succeeded.
Because the world learned something that night.
The vaults of the 21st century aren't made of steel. They're made of code. Years later, the story of the Bangladesh bank heist is still unfolding, not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the quiet, nervous meetings of cybersecurity teams and the hushed calls of central banks. Because the truth is, what happened in February 2016 didn't just change one country. It changed the rules of how the modern world moves money. In the months after the heist, countries around the world began conducting internal audits. SWIFT terminals were suddenly treated like nuclear facilities, sealed off, heavily monitored, and guarded by layers of encryption. But the illusion of safety had already been shattered. If a billion-dollar theft could start with a single compromised workstation in Dhaka, what hope did smaller institutions have? What about regional banks, microlenders, or crypto exchanges? The fear wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. The backbone of the world economy had been exposed as fragile, human, and frighteningly easy to exploit. And while the world tried to patch the holes, Lazarus evolved. By 2017, their focus shifted from traditional banks to cryptocurrency, the new digital frontier. No SWIFT systems, no central oversight, no easy way to trace transactions. They struck cryptocurrency exchanges in South Korea, Japan, and even Europe, stealing hundreds of millions in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other tokens. One by one, crypto platforms were drained. Coincheck, Ubit, KuCoin all hit with Lazarus-linked attacks. Each time, the pattern was eerily familiar. Custom malware, fake job offers, spear phishing campaigns. The same precision, the same patience. It was Bangladesh all over again, just in a different currency. By 2024, United Nations investigators estimated that North Korea's cyber operations had generated over $3 billion for the regime. Funds that, according to intelligence agencies, were used to build nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. The thefts weren't just financial crimes. They were acts of geopolitical defiance, digital warfare disguised as bank robbery. To this day, international task forces still chase the shadow of Lazarus. The U.S. Treasury has sanctioned dozens of North Korean operatives, front companies, and even cryptocurrency mixers believed to launder their stolen funds. Interpol red notices exist for hackers who will never leave Pyongyang. And yet, the group remains active, shifting names, changing tactics, adapting faster than the world can keep up. In Seoul, one investigator described it best. They're not just hackers, they're a state economy wearing a digital mask. In Bangladesh, the wounds remain visible. The country managed to recover a small fraction of the stolen funds, around $15 million traced through Philippine casinos, but the majority is gone forever. The central bank overhauled its systems, replacing old hardware, tightening access, and redesigning its security protocols. But the shame lingered. For a nation already fighting for financial stability, being robbed on a global stage was a humiliation that would take years to fade. And yet, from that humiliation came a grim kind of awareness that cybersecurity was no longer a luxury of the rich. It was a necessity for survival. There's a poetic irony in it all. A small, isolated country, struggling under sanctions and scarcity, managed to outwit some of the most powerful financial institutions on Earth. With no satellites, no Silicon Valley, no Wall Street, just a handful of programmers and state desperation, North Korea proved something extraordinary and terrifying. That in the digital age, power doesn't come from wealth or armies. It comes from access, from knowing which doors aren't locked. The Bangladesh bank heist left behind lessons etched in code and consequence. Lesson 1. trust is not a security measure. Lesson 2. Systems are only as safe as the people guarding them. Lesson 3. Cyber war isn't coming, it's already here. Banks, governments, and corporations now spend billions on cybersecurity. New protocols are written, new encryption standards adopted. But Lazarus still lurks in the digital night, watching, adapting, waiting. In a dimly lit archive room inside the Bangladesh bank, the printer that once betrayed the nation now sits silent. Its paper tray is empty, its light is off. But for those who were there that night, who watched millions vanish into the void, the sound of that humming machine will never leave them. Because it wasn't just paper rolling out, it was the sound of a nation's heartbeat being rewritten. And somewhere far away, behind encrypted walls and state firewalls, the architects of that silence still sit in the glow of their monitors. Faces lit not by daylight, but by the flicker of stolen power. Because in the end, the Lazarus Group didn't just rob a nation. They robbed the world of its certainty that our systems were safe, that our banks were untouchable, that money itself couldn't be stolen from the sky. And perhaps that's the most dangerous theft of all. If you enjoyed this story, hit like and subscribe for more real stories from the digital world. Don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss what's next.